The contact appeared on the N/SPS-67 surface radar at 0347 local time. 3 returns. Small. Fast. Closing from the northeast at 22 knots. The Persian Gulf was black, the air thick with humidity, and the USS Gravely, a Flight IIA Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, was transiting the Strait of Hormuz, 13 miles wide at its narrowest point, flanked by Iranian territorial water on the north and Omani coastline to the south. The watch officer noted the tracks. So did the Combat Information Center. Nobody panicked. This kind of thing happened in Hormuz. That was, perhaps, the first miscalculation. The 3 skiffs had been in the water for 90 minutes before anyone aboard Gravely knew they existed. They had launched from a dhow anchored in shallow water 7 nautical miles northeast of the transit lane, running without lights, their outboard engines tuned to generate minimal radar return by keeping their profiles low and their approach angle oblique to the ship's radar beam. This was not amateur seamanship. Small open-hull fiberglass skiffs in the 25 to 30-foot range are a known threat architecture in the Gulf. Cheap, fast, extraordinarily difficult to classify from radar alone. They register as fishing traffic. As debris. As noise. The problem is not detecting them. The problem is deciding what they are before the tactical geometry closes. At 7 miles, a skiff traveling at 25 knots reaches a ship in less than 17 minutes. That is the entire decision envelope. That is the whole timeline. The 3 boats were now inside it. In the CIC, the tactical action officer, a lieutenant commander with 2 previous Gulf deployments, was already running mental geometry. 3 small contacts, closing in a loose wedge formation, bearing roughly 0.47 relative to the ship's bow. They weren't following a fishing pattern. They weren't holding course on any commercial routing. They were closing. That distinction mattered more than anything else on that screen. He ordered the ship's bridge team to track the contacts visually and queried the radar picture for speed over ground. 24 knots. Then 26. The skiffs were accelerating. The Gravely had multiple options. It always did. The difficulty was sequencing them correctly before the geometry ran out. Warning signals were activated. The International Morse Code Danger Signal broadcast on the International Maritime Distress Frequency, 2182 kHz. Bridge-to-bridge radio. Searchlights swept toward the contacts. Standard procedure for a vessel that might be pirate, might be harassment, might be something considerably worse. No response. The skiffs held their course. What the watch team could see in those moments, 3 blips, converging. What they could not yet see, what those blips were carrying. This is the core problem of Hormuz. The strait has been used for decades as a pressure point, by state actors using non-state proxies, by asymmetric forces testing response thresholds, by armed groups whose tactical doctrine is built entirely around uncertainty and speed. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGCN, had been documented operating fast attack craft in this manner since at least 2004. Not always to attack. Sometimes to probe. Sometimes to map response patterns. Sometimes simply to force a warship crew into a decision that costs them something, time, exposure, political friction, or worse. The problem is that, probably harassment, and actual attack run, look identical at 6 miles in the dark. At that moment, Gravely's crew had to treat them the same. The ship's crew moved to general quarters at 0351. Sailors who had been asleep 6 minutes ago were now at weapon stations. The 5-inch/62 caliber Mark 45 gun mount forward was crewed and live. The 2 25mm Mk38 chain gun mounts, 1 per side amidships, were manned and tracking. Crew-served .50 caliber M2 HB machine guns were cleared hot on the bridge wings. The ship's close-in weapon systems were in automated standby. Every layer of the Gravely's close-range defensive architecture was now active. This is what an Arleigh Burke destroyer does. It does not carry one weapon for this problem. It carries many weapons at many ranges, and it sequences them by threat classification, closing speed, and range band. The doctrine is layered response. But layered response still requires range. And range was disappearing. At 5 miles, the skiffs split. Not dramatically. Not obviously. The center contact maintained heading. The left and right contacts began drifting, very slightly, widening the wedge angle by approximately 15 degrees each. The formation was no longer a compressed cone. It was becoming an arc. The tactical action officer recognized the geometry immediately. An arc approach means you cannot address all three threats with a single weapon orientation. It forces the ship to split attention, split fire control, and split command time. You are no longer responding to one problem. You are responding to three overlapping problems with a shared, finite decision window. He ordered a hard course change to starboard, swinging the ship's bow toward the leftmost contact and narrowing the angle to the other two. Reducing the arc buying geometry. He was not fleeing. He was reshaping the tactical problem back into one the Gravely could own. The skiffs adjusted. Whoever was driving them saw the ship move and corrected. The arc re-established within 40 seconds. These were not panicking fishermen. These were people who understood boat positioning well enough to maintain a tactical formation against a maneuvering warship in the dark. That told the TAO everything he needed to know. At 3.5 miles, the lead skiff accelerated sharply. 30 knots. Then 32. The radar track sharpened. The time to contact had just collapsed from over 6 minutes to under 4. 4 minutes. That is the entire remaining ENGA. Gement window. Warning shots from the Mk-38 mount crossed the water approximately 200 yards ahead of the lead contact. Bright tracer. Unmistakable. The rounds churned the surface in a line directly across the skiff's projected course. International law and rules of engagement in that theater required graduated escalation before directed fire, warning signals, radio, flares, warning shots, then direct engagement. The Gravely had just executed the penultimate step. The lead skiff did not turn. It held course, held speed, and the distance dropped through 2 miles. At 2 miles, a 25 mm round from the Mk-38 finds its target in approximately 1 second. The problem is not ballistics at that point. The problem is what happens in the seconds before the mount can be directed, cleared, and fired with authorized lethal intent. The commanding officer, now on the bridge, authorized direct engagement. The Mk-38 mount engaged the lead skiff at approximately 1,800 yards. A single, controlled burst. The contact disappeared from the surface radar. The second and third skiffs did not stop. They held course for another 3 seconds, long enough for the gun mounts on the port and starboard sides to come fully to bear, then one broke hard right and the other throttled back sharply and began circling. The portside gun crew tracked the braking contact. The starboard gunners held the circling boat under observation. A second warning burst across the bow of the circling contact stopped its movement entirely. Both remaining skiffs came dead in the water inside 90 seconds of the first engagement. The entire active engagement phase had lasted under 4 minutes. What the Gravely's crew found when a rigid inflatable boat went out in first light, the lead skiff had been carrying 2 men and a fuel drum lashed in the bow with a mortar round attached to its base. Not a sophisticated device. Not a shape-charged naval mine. But more than enough, at contact with a hull moving at 18 knots, to cause significant damage below the waterline. The second skiff carried AK platform rifles and an RPG-7 with 2 rounds. The third appeared to be the coordination platform, carrying communications gear and a handheld GPS. This was a sequenced attack. 1 shock and sink contact attempt. 1 direct fire suppression. 1 coordination node. It had failed because the Gravely CIC recognized the arc approach geometry early enough to force the decision before the contact closed to lethal range, because the crew had executed general quarters in under 4 minutes, and because the TAO had reshaped the tactical geometry with a course change before the closing distance made that course change irrelevant. Margins this thin are not comfortable. They are simply what the geometry allows. Here is what this engagement illustrates about modern threat environments in constrained waters like the Strait of Hormuz. Surface radar sees skiffs. It does not automatically tell you what they are carrying. Classification depends on behavior, formation, response to warning, and closing rate, and every second spent classifying is a second lost on the engagement clock. The decision window for a 25-knot small boat contact starting at 7 miles is approximately 17 minutes from first detection to contact. That window sounds wide. It is not wide. By the time visual confirmation is possible, by the time formation behavior becomes unambiguous, by the time general quarters is complete and weapons are manned, the geometry has consumed most of it. The tactical architecture that saved the Gravely in this scenario was not a single system. It was a sequenced layered response that included radar, human judgment, course maneuvering, warning signals, warning fire, and direct engagement, each step calibrated against dwindling time. Remove any one of those layers and the math changes. The choke point geography of Hormuz makes this problem structurally persist. NT. A destroyer in transit cannot simply accelerate away. The channel is too shallow, too narrow, too traffic to allow unrestricted maneuvering. Every warship transiting Hormuz is operating inside someone else's chosen tactical environment. That is what choke points do. They convert a powerful, deep-water combatant into a vessel with constrained options, and constrained options are what asymmetric threats are designed to exploit. The IRGCN and affiliated proxy forces understand this precisely. Their doctrine is not to sink destroyers in open ocean duels they cannot win. Their doctrine is to close range through deception, split attention through formation geometry, and force a decision under time compression. The goal may not even be destruction. Sometimes the goal is an incident, a death, a political cost, a response that can be shaped into a narrative. The crew of the Gravely, in this modeled engagement, denied them all of it. But the lesson here is not about one ship winning one encounter. The lesson is about what it actually takes to survive a threat that is deliberately designed to exploit the gap between what sensors see and what judgment can resolve before time runs out. 3 skiffs. 22 minutes from first contact to engagement. 4 minutes of active threat. And a tactical decision window that required a course change, weapons clearance, graduated response, and lethal authorization, all executed correctly, in sequence, in the dark, at sea. The asymmetric threat in narrow water is not dramatic in the way that missile duels are dramatic. It does not arrive at Mach 3 from over the horizon. It arrives at 30 knots, in the dark, shaped like everything else in the water, and it runs straight at the hull while you are still deciding what it is. That is why the strait is dangerous. Not because it is deep. Because it is narrow enough that speed and surprise close the geometry before doctrine alone can stop it. The Gravely got the timing right. B. Why a margin that was real, and measured, and not comfortable at all? In Hormuz, that margin is the only margin there is.